The laws of unintended consequences can be brutal. What seemed like a simple, sensible, logical, beneficial decision turns out to be an economic disaster of epic proportions way down the line. But once implemented, those consequences can be unstoppable. Now, this is a UK EV channel, but recent US simple decisions are likely to have catastrophic consequences on us and the entire world auto industry. I'm Dave. I'm taking on one of those simple decisions. Stick around, this is wild. Well, this is not strictly speaking about tariffs, but it starts with them. Trump discovered that Canada exports many times as much to the US as the US exports to Canada, so totally ignoring the fact that there are 8 times as many US citizens as Canadian, he thought it'd be a good idea to balance the books, slap on tariffs to make Canadian exports to the US so expensive that they practically stop. At the same time, creating massive job opportunities in US businesses so that there'll always be plenty of stuff manufactured in the US for them to export to Canada. Balance the books. Lovely simple theory, but I believe most of my viewers will already have seen some of the problems here. No matter how much stuff the US makes, there are simply not enough Canadians to buy all that stuff that the US is now going to be making. Plus, Canada has some things that America doesn't, things that the US cannot just make, like rare earth elements. They're needed for the huge boom in, well, pretty much everything. It's LED lighting, stereo speakers, smartphones, tablets, missile guidance systems, defence radars, oil refining equipment, medical imaging devices, vehicle catalytic converters for the ICE cars, and control rods in nuclear reactors. Oh yeah, and EVs. Now, it's true that the US has roughly the same amount underground as Canada, but that's where it's going to stay. It takes about 10 years to get a new mine approved, up and running, and producing their own. So that raises an issue. How does the US cope over the next 10 years without importing those rare earth metals from Canada? Well, it could go to China. No, seriously, stop laughing. China is the world's largest supplier of rare earth metals and loads of other things. But the tariffs have arrived, and one product that Canada used to export to the US was metals, which included steel and copper in huge quantities. Canada is a huge copper producer, indeed about 1/5 in world value. And when the US slapped 50% tariff on Canada's copper exports to the US, Canada decided, well, just simply look at other markets. There must be other countries in the world that wanted copper. And indeed there are. And there are others that want LNG that Canada has loads of, but previously exported only to the US. And there are many others that want essentials like crude oil. That's much in demand. So rather than Canadian companies going bust, they just found new customers. Previously, their only customer was the US. Now they didn't want to sell anything to the US, but they found a whole new market out there. And the Canadian copper turned out it had one huge advantage that nobody had even considered before. Copper is a very energy-intensive metal, and that's controlled by the national grid, and they're generally not very green. So producing copper was a dirty business. But Canada suddenly found it had a premium product because their national grid, actually, it isn't dirty. In fact, it's remarkably clean. Canada generates about 85% of its electricity from non-fossil sources, predominantly hydroelectric, nuclear and wind. That is incredibly clean. And most countries around the world, they need to clean up their act. They now track their pollution from raw material through processing to the finished product. Remember, our new EV subsidy is based on pollution from the national grid where the car or battery is made. So clean copper turns out to be a premium product. Canada found a new market at a higher price. Well, even fossil fuels sounds strange, but if they're produced cleaner, they do attract a premium, as Canada found out with Germany. See, previously they thought their best and most stable supply of energy was Russia. And when that came to an end, Canada stepped in with greenish LNG, liquefied natural gas. Germany loves it. So Canada had a new mission. Clean, green products carry a premium price, so Canada began to look at everything, including their own grid. And it's now installing even more wind and solar, together with battery storage. That's a result. But it goes on from there. The auto industry was suddenly a mess with new tariffs. It's not an industry as such. It is more like a giant auto factory spreading across the entire US, Canada and Mexico. One giant facility. And previously products travelled tariff-free between them very freely. Make a chassis in Canada with Canadian steel, send it to Mexico, where they bolted on the suspension components that they had made, then send it to Georgia, USA, to have the locally produced engine installed, etc. and so on. You get the picture. And cars being made or assembled or partly assembled in Canada made Canadians proud to buy the Fords or GMs or Stellantis models. Trump went and destroyed all that. Not so much with the tariffs, much of the mighty factory running across borders is actually already covered by the USMCA. It's an agreement put in place by Trump in 2020, tariff-free, when he was last in power. So that is a tariff-free agreement still in place, but with restrictions. Now, it doesn't cover all the manufacturing giant, but what it did do when Trump started imposing these draconian tariffs was to make Canadians want to stop buying American. That's it. That included American cars, even those being assembled in Canada in part or in whole. Where once it was natural and normal to just buy the big three American car brands, suddenly that all stopped. But they can't stop buying cars. They're always in demand. So they just turn to the traditional other manufacturers, Europe, South Korea, Japan. That all made a lot of sense. It's great for the European manufacturers. Such a shame there's only 41 million Canadians to buy them. But that also encouraged China to look at its own green credentials. Being tied to the US gave them less scope for innovation. But now they were free. The world was their lobster. Canada had always tried to do the right thing. They did have ambitious targets for transport, and they were very much along the lines of the UK and Europe, targets for phasing out ICE cars and phasing in EVs. They had a target for 2030 of hopefully getting somewhere around maybe possibly 40% lower emissions and getting to 100% EV only by 2035. I say hopefully in this case because the US makes much bigger cars. I mean, their best-selling model ever is the huge F-150 pickup truck. That engine starts at 2.7 litres, the most popular either 3.5 litre or 5 litre. Once free of American influence, they could just go to Japan, where most of the pickup trucks are 2.4 litres and top of the range is a whopping 2.8. But Japan works to stricter emission standards, so their 2.8 is not in the same class as the American 2.7 or nowhere near the 5 litre. Now, it's only been a very short time, but already Canada is asking, why can't we import EVs from China? Oh, we don't have a fight with them. That would help our green credentials, having EVs. So today, Canada is revisiting their environmental standards, and the first results, they've been announced. They've said no more huge American giant V8 engines spewing out fumes. It's not yet in law, but they're looking to tighten it up and tighten up their existing emission regulations and then go even further. And America is now looking at this with abject horror. They had a massive market in Canada. Now it looks to have gone. At exactly the same time, their auto factories are already suffering. They're running fewer shifts, making fewer cars. Well, we in the UK previously imported the 5-litre Mustang. I think that was about it for American stuff, but I imagine its days are severely numbered now. But that outlook is incredibly serious. Trump seems not to like EVs, despite having an all-American EV company in its own shores, the largest EV manufacturer in the world. But he's no longer BFF with Musk, so EVs now bad. But with EVs bad and the entire US market for ICE cars disappearing into a black hole, the issue is no longer where do we make our cars, but a much more serious, who's going to buy them? China's out. They just tipped over to 50% of all new sales are EVs, and they're abandoning ICE cars like they're going out of fashion. That was before the tariffs. Can't imagine there's much of a market left in China for anything American, let alone a 5-litre gas guzzler that will cost a fortune with China's tariffs on EV goods. Ford US hardly exports anything to Europe. That's a job for Ford Europe, and they're not doing a very good job anyhow. Don't have a good track record in Europe. Besides, Europe is heading very much EV, 100% EV, and Ford lacking in EV models in the budget to family end of the market. A 30k Puma is not a budget model as I know it. Tariffs have seriously upset both Canada and Mexico, previously very large buyers of American cars. Back in the States, tariffs are going to dramatically put up the price of their cars to their fellow Americans. Seems that the US motor industry has just about run out of customers. So a desire or urge to level the playing field with tariffs might just have destroyed the US auto industry. Whatever Ford does, so does GM and Stellantis. Their marketplace has already shrunk below economic levels in many areas. They can't run all their existing ICE factories at full production. Most are already operating reduced shifts. And the only way out for the rest of the world, EVs, well, that's not on Trump's list of to-do this term. In fact, I'm sure if he had his way, he'd probably also shut them down for definite. Well, the US is going to be left with thousands or tens of thousands of unemployed auto workers in a period of history when the US is already suffering from higher than normal unemployment. And the economy is already suffering, according to all the experts. No boom in sight here. So how will the economy handle the closure, effectively, of the 100-year-old auto industry? Well, it's a dreadful thought. A total restructuring of the entire auto industry, and not all will survive. The entire industry is massively in debt, and this is needed like an ashtray on a motorbike. We are in for a wild ride. I'm Dave.